Hello, everybody. This is Samantha from the law offices of Samantha Wolfe. Thank you for joining us for our monthly virtual seminar here at our office. We always like to do virtual seminars just to get information out to our clients and to our referral sources. And today I have a very special guest. With me today, I have Connor Burns, and our office has had the pleasure of Connor interning here as a legal intern for the past 2 semesters. So before we get into what we're going to talk about today, Connor, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, talk us a little bit about your law school experience and kind of where you are in life.
Yeah, so I'm Connor. I'm from originally from Long Island, New York. I came out here to attend Penn State Dickinson Law. I'm a 3L, so that means I'm in my last year. I'll be sitting for the bar this July, actually. So that's coming up rather quickly. My focus is study right now is estate planning, elder law. So I've been with Sam since I want to say June or July, right, of last
Yes.
year. So I've learned a lot here. It's been a terrific experience. I'm very grateful for it. So I look forward to learning more the rest of this semester, and then on into my legal career.
So tell us why you wanted to go to law school. What prompted you to take the LSATs and decide to apply?
Um, well, so back in 2017, I think it was, I was involved in a car accident. And during that time, I had an attorney, and I was kind of in the midst of civil litigation there, with the individual who had, hit me. So, I saw the type of law he did. And at that point in my undergraduate career, I attended Siena College, and they had a pre-law program that I wasn't too interested in because I didn't feel like I was smart enough to handle it, frankly. So, after seeing the work that he did on my case, I went, you know what, maybe I should try this. So I went into the pre-law program and I took the coursework and I ended up liking it. Um, and then it was I graduated right around the pandemic. Um, and when I did that, there really were no jobs. Everything was shut down. So I said, you know what? I might as well just go back to school. Might as well just get my JD, my Juris Doctorate. It just made sense at the time, and I don't regret that decision at all. So.
It's interesting. Mine was similar because when I graduated from my undergrad, same thing. We were kind of in a decline economy-wise. And so it was like, I'm going to take the LSATs. If I get a high enough score, I'll go to law school. So it's interesting how life does that. Tell me what the most interesting class you've taken this semester.
It's kind of a loaded question. My most interesting class in law school is actually how I met Sam. Was her class. So I did take a estate planning drafting course with her, and that was absolutely wonderful. She's a terrific teacher. So I really did enjoy that. And this semester, I think my elder law courses have been very good. I had one with Jared Childers. He was terrific. I enjoyed that class. And then I have one with Kathleen Pearson now, which is just a continuation of that course. So the elder law courses are very interesting to me.
So is it reinforcing that this is the area of law that you would like to do post graduation and bar?
Yes.
Okay.
It
So you
it
haven't
very
gotten
much
into
is.
any situations where you're like, ugh, this is horrible.
No. It's a little bit more relaxed, I guess, in a sense. I mean, you do deal with some pretty terrible crises in some individuals' lives, things that need to be parsed out rather quickly. But it's not like I'm running around to I will be running around to courthouses and have all these, briefs that I have to write and all these deadlines and everything. It's just really focusing on helping the community, and helping people that really need it. And I do really enjoy that aspect of it.
Good. Well, when Connor decided to join our office this semester, one of the things we asked Connor to do was to come up with some marketing ideas for our virtual seminars. And so Connor came up with a nice slate of virtual seminars for our spring, carrying us through the end of 2025. And one of the topics that he brought up that we're going to talk about today would be the topic of digital assets. So I wanted to start with, tell me a little bit of why this sparked your curiosity. Why did this get on your docket of topics that you thought would be good for clients?
Yeah, well, it I guess the rationale essentially came from my parents and my grandparents, and I can see as technology progresses, as things have become more digital, that their knowledge base has kind of fallen off a little bit, and not only in terms of finance, but just generally. I mean, you give them a cell phone, they might not know how to use certain features on it. They might not know, how certain things work. So that kind of registered to me as somebody who, is interested in doing elder law and estate planning, that elderly people should really know, how these systems work, what they can protect, what they can't protect, the differences between like ownership and just kind of renting something. It kind of resonated me with like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you should say that because more and more clients are asking about digital assets and whether our documents include digital asset language, which I have two stories that I wanted to tell, and then we'll kind of dive into the technical stuff. So the first is that, and this has been a while, but way back when I was in law school, my younger sister's really good friend passed away unexpectedly, and he was early 20s at the time, and he had social media accounts where he had like posted, he had a lot of pictures on there. And when he passed away, his family had a very difficult and uphill battle with the social media platform getting access to his account. And so it was months of time before they could access it. They wanted to be able to pull some of the pictures off of it. They wanted to be able to shut down the account because people were posting on this individual's wall. And so I didn't realize how difficult that was until my sister was telling me about the experience as far as that goes. So that's probably been 20 years. So we've now had 20 years worth of more digital assets that are all intertwined in our lives. The other experience that I had is that so many of our clients do things online. They make online transfers, they email a lot, and what I'm trying to educate clients about is that if you want your power of attorney to be able to do those same electronic transfers, you really need to have language in the document that permits your agent under the financial power of attorney to be able to do those electronic transfers and to be able to have access to those online accounts. Otherwise, a lot of times the companies won't allow the agent to have access to those accounts. So a personal story and then a client story. So when you brought this topic to our marketing meeting and said, hey, maybe we should talk about this, I just thought it was a great opportunity. And I thought it would be a fun one for you and I to do together because I can kind of talk about the practical side, but what I appreciated is that you put together a great PowerPoint that kind of talks about the legal aspects of it and kind of goes into all the different behind the scenes stuff. So with that said, Connor, I'm going to go ahead and share a screen, and what you and I are going to do is we're just going to have a conversation about digital assets in the estate planning area. So let me go ahead and share, and we'll pull this up. Okay, so the topic today is estate planning for the digital age. And just like we do with all of our seminars, one of the reasons that we do this is so that it aligns with our mission statement. Just getting out information to our clients and referral sources is really important to us. We're going to post this on our YouTube channel and then on our website so the clients can go back and reference this about digital assets. Okay, Connor, our first slide is what are digital assets and are they important? So I think the short answer is they're very important. We use
Yes.
them every day. So walk me through some of the ways on a daily basis that we would be engaging with different digital assets.
So in terms of digital assets, what I would say is probably anything having to do with like digital transfers. So if you use, let's say, online banking apps,
Mhm.
different things like that. If you have any social media accounts, all those fall into it. I
Mhm.
know a lot of people have subscriptions, and we'll get more into that,
Yes.
as this presentation goes. But things like Disney Plus and Hulu and different things like that would fall into this category, things that people use every day. Um, and any sort of digital income that you may have, if you may run a YouTube channel or make any money off of ad revenue from Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, those sorts of things also fall into this category. And sometimes though that ad revenue can be rather substantial.
Mhm.
So we want to make sure that we plan around those sorts of things.
How about cryptocurrency? Would that be considered a digital asset as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That's kind of come onto the market. I guess rather recently. Within the last I guess like 15 years ish.
Mhm. Yes.
It's really picked up in popularity. And I know from experiences here at your firm that there are quite a few clients that have
Mhm.
Bitcoin and other things like that. Some individuals actually have held Bitcoin since its inception, but really haven't checked on it recently. And the values are tremendous currently.
Yes.
So we really want to make sure we protect something that has that much value.
I had an estate, Connor, that the person did online gambling and they had an account that had like so many credits as far as like online gambling credits
Mhm.
that you could cash out or convert to like cash. Would that be considered a digital asset?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I would absolutely say it would be. And depending upon how long this individual had been gambling, I know friends of mine that have a tremendous amount of assets in
Yes.
terms of digital gambling. So
Yes. Yes. So I almost think of digital assets as like the savings bonds of the estate anymore. So it used to be that when we had an estate with savings bonds, it was always a little bit more clunky, a little bit more challenging. And I think digital assets have kind of replaced that. As far as I think people don't realize how many assets they have that would fall under the definition of a digital asset, that we need to make sure the estate planning documents, whether it be your executor, your personal representative, or your agent under the power of attorney, can access and manage those assets. And so I think that's one of the driving forces behind our new age of estate planning documents, is making sure we have those provisions in there. So I look at it twofold. So the first is actually being able to handle the digital assets, like if somebody has Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, but it also would be access to any social media accounts, any email accounts, anything like that. Because the argument would be that even if you had somebody's login and username, if you're not the person, technically you'd be in violation of the terms of agreement or the terms of service if you don't have language in your estate planning documents that would allow access to those assets. So that's kind of our second point here, just making sure that for estate planning we have proper powers in our documents that allows our executor and our heirs to be able to access those. Without that, we have assets that would become inaccessible, lost, or subject to legal disputes. And from Pennsylvania's standpoint, if we have clients that have digital assets that are unclaimed through the estate, that would follow all of the other rules, which means eventually it would escheat to the state and become unclaimed property that somebody down the line would have to claim. It's not like it just evaporates or goes into thin air. Something would have to be done. And so it's easier to do it at the time you're administering the estate for that decedent. Any other thoughts you have about why digital assets are important, Connor, before we advance to the next slide?
no, I think we ran through that quite well.
Okay. Let's talk about, let me make sure. Okay, good. So let's talk about the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act, or what we lovingly call RFADA. Let's talk about that because it's a nice mouthful of stuff. So tell me a little bit about RFADA and why this is important.
So as I understand it, this law kind of went on to outline how digital assets should be handled.
Mhm.
Um, So it really, from as I would understand, requires specific language in estate planning documents in order to make this possible.
Mhm.
Um, so it really is kind of an outline and a basis that we use in order to write some of these documents.
Yes. And just so everyone knows, I looked it up just to make sure that I had the date right, but our Pennsylvania's Rafata. Governor Wolfe signed Act 72 of 2020, and this gave the ability for the executor, the agent, to have control if we have language in our documents to be able to have control over digital assets. Now, it does require this individual to be named in the estate planning documents to be able to access the information. How we do it in our office is we just embed the digital asset language in our financial power of attorney and in our last will and testament. So we've kind of constructed, we've done the research, and we've drafted some language that would basically say whoever we've listed in this document as our agent under the financial power of attorney or as our executor under the will, they have access to digital assets. We reference the Pennsylvania statute that says this is how they're able to get their authority, and then we've spelled out what powers they have under the document to be able to access digital assets. And so that's how we use it in our office. We just go ahead and incorporate it into the financial power of attorney and into the last will and testament. And this then allows the different companies to permit the agent under the financial power of attorney and the executor under the will to access those. Now, the important thing to remember is that you still have to go through the proper procedure. So, for example, if we're dealing with someone who passed away and we need access to digital assets, the executor still has to get appointed, which means that you're still probating the estate, you're getting a short certificate where it says who the executor is, that they have legal authority, and then by getting that legal authority, then they can access those digital assets. So normally, if we'd be dealing with a company that has those digital assets or a custodian that, manages or stores those digital assets, that company would require a copy of the short certificate, of the death certificate, and all of those normal documents that are needed when someone passes away. So it's not like Rafata circumvents the process. It's just kind of giving the executor or the agent under the power of attorney the legal authority to be able to do or handle these assets once they've provided the appropriate documentation. What else, Connor? Anything else about Rafata that we should mention?
Yeah. So if we follow this slide, custodians here kind of goes off of it's really a reference to who's keeping the information.
So give me an
Like if you have
example of a custodian. Like if we're talking about a
yeah,
social media platform, what would a
yeah.
custodian be?
So exactly, if you have a like if you have an Instagram account, we're talking about the custodian being Instagram itself or Facebook, who is the owner of Instagram. So one thing I did want to note in this is that these custodians, like Facebook, Instagram, what have you, could refuse to disclose certain information. It depends on what that is. And if we look under point 3 on the slide, that would be in the instance of deleted data or joint accounts. So if, let's say, a decedent were to have a joint Instagram account with their daughter
Mhm.
or something of that nature, or maybe a close friend or something like that, the custodian, being Facebook, Instagram, or whoever, could refuse. Even if your last will and testament has said that you get access to that information, and the same goes for deleted data. So if they have any messages, if they have any posts that they have deleted, that the custodian may have kept on file, you might not be able to get access into those to that information. It's important to note that.
That is a good point because I haven't seen a lot of joint accounts. I mean, I've seen a couple. Usually it's like between husband and wife, they might have like a joint Facebook account or something like that. And so it makes
Yeah.
sense from a legal perspective that a custodian could refuse to disclose or provide information if it's a joint account. It also makes sense that if I have an account and I've deleted information, there's a reason I deleted it. And so should the custodian have to provide that? And so I think that makes sense that if it's a deleted information or a file, the custodian isn't required to provide that digital asset to either the executor or the agent. So that's interesting. Tell me a little bit about, because I'm curious, I know from my experience that a lot of different companies, and I know we're going to get to it in these slides, but a lot of different companies have terms of agreements. So the other thing that we need to be mindful of when we're talking about this is if we're dealing with a social media platform that has an agreement in place, do a lot of those agreements address if someone passes away? Tell me how they interplay between the terms of agreement or the terms of service and maybe digital asset language under a will. How does that work?
So that's a great question, actually. So I'm not too sure, frankly. I know that the custodian retains some of the right to withhold information to some degree.
Which you
So
have on this bullet point, because you do have fiduciaries cannot access like medical records or financial information without
yes,
express authorization, right? I mean, that would make
yes.
sense. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm not sure about specific social media platforms, whether or not they would include asset language. But for the purposes of this law specifically, it does allow them to withhold, as Sam had referenced, the last bullet point, highly private information as well. So any sort of medical records or something like that. I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but medical records and other documentation like that would fall under different provisions in the will rather than digital asset language.
Right. So we always have the HIPAA release, right? That's what we think of in our healthcare documents that would allow someone you've specifically authorized access to your medical and hospital records. So the only interplay I think that would happen between a HIPAA release and maybe it being digital would be if you're trying to access it through like a digital format. Like I think of like patient portals. Like I know when I go to my doctor, like I have a patient portal. And so I could see where it's almost like you have two things going on. You have the HIPAA, which is access to your medical information. But then if somebody's accessing it through your health portal, because so much is posted on these health portal now, what does that look like? And so whenever I'm logging into something, or even like, for example, I know some social media platforms, they do sometimes have agreements that address this. So we're seeing it more and more where there will be a specific agreement that the custodian has. And when we're talking about custodian, Facebook, Instagram, whatever the company is that's storing the information, they may have a separate form or agreement that's separate from the terms of service that we normally think of, where they may actually have a provision that says upon death, this is how we handle the account. And that's always going to take the top priority. So if the custodian has an internal form or has a form. For example, I do believe Facebook has one. That is one social media platform that has an agreement. A lot of them actually have them. And so that being that agreement would actually trump anything that's in the estate planning document. So the first question is always, does this custodian have an agreement that governs access to information when someone dies? Now, a lot of them would just say, yeah, it's the executor. If somebody wants to access this information, it's going to be the executor. But they can have their own form, and that's always going to be the first place you look. If the company doesn't have forms or some sort of agreement, that's where it's then defaulting to our estate planning documents, which, Connor, I think is to the point of what is on the fourth bullet point, where custodians can provide tools to users that would allow them to specify which digital assets can be accessed after death. That would be the custodian's own agreement, and that's always going to be the document that takes priority. If the custodian doesn't have an agreement, that's where then we can go to the default of, did we put language in our estate planning documents that allow our agent or our executor access to information? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So you had it on there. I just kind of wanted to flesh that out a little bit more
Mhm.
and kind of figure out what that means. And I think that's where different custodians can have different agreements that might specify what happens or what assets somebody can access after death. All right, let's go to our next slide. So let's talk about this. I loved this slide. So let's talk about these different types of assets. I like lists, and I like that we have these lists in different colors. It makes me happy to see them color coded. So let's start at the top. Let's talk about digital assets. So we have financial assets. So this would be online bank accounts, PayPal, Venmo, cryptocurrency wallets, which would be the Bitcoin. And how do you say the other word, the E word?
Ethereum.
Ethereum. Oh, yes, I have heard of that. See, I'm aging myself a little bit when I say, how do you pronounce that?
No.
And then stock trading accounts. So if we were to talk about clients that we currently have, we do tend to have clients that are planning for the second half of life. So I see some online bank accounts, I see some PayPal accounts or stock trading accounts, but I haven't seen a whole lot of people in the age group that we have our large number of clients dealing with Venmo or cryptocurrency wallets to the extent that we would have a concern. But I think we're only going to see more clients with these type of financial assets.
Yes.
That's just my thought. All right, let's talk about number 2. So we have email accounts, social media profiles, digital photos and videos, and cloud storage. My guess is that 90% of the people that want access to social media platforms probably want access to the photos that are on there, because a lot of people store a lot of photos on Facebook and don't, for whatever reason, they might be years old, but don't actually have them saved anywhere. So that's a lot of access there. But talk to me a little bit about all of the personal assets that we're talking about here, and talk to me a little bit about I guess I want to know, when we're accessing these accounts, do a lot of these accounts have internal mechanisms that would allow access to these personal assets? Any thoughts on that?
You mean for a third party, or you
Yes.
mean
Yes.
um
So I'm thinking logistically, Connor. Like, I'm not thinking
well,
legally. Like,
yeah.
when I log into my email account, I'm just thinking I have a recovery email, right?
Yes. Yes.
And like on some of these accounts, I can list like another backup person. So I do think we're seeing
Yes.
more and more of these assets and accounts that are addressing it. It's just that I don't know that they're addressing it as well as they could, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It seems like I've had several email accounts throughout the years, and even my school email account. It has like a 12-factor authentication process that I have to go through in order to get into it myself. Um, so I couldn't imagine, a third party, if I had been deceased, to go in and try to get access to that account, unless there was some sort of mechanism, and I would imagine there is for third parties to get in. But they don't make that information very readily available. I find that I am pretty tech savvy, but even I have never set up anything having to do with third party access of email accounts, social media
Right.
profiles, anything like that. It's kind of probably hidden in settings or hidden in account information or somewhere. They don't really make it readily available, and especially for people that aren't very technologically inclined, it might be very difficult in order to get access to that information when you really
Right.
need it. So, in my opinion, I think that social media platforms and email account hosts, it might be due to change that paradigm a little bit.
And I think the reality when I'm looking through the rest of this list is that Always make sure your documents have something dealing with digital assets and access to it, because like we talked about, more and more companies are creating their own agreements talking about what happens when someone dies and what somebody can access and what they cannot access. But it never hurts to have it in the documents, because again, if you don't have a separate agreement that governs it, at least you have the ability for your agent under the financial power of attorney or your executor to be able to access those under the documents. So, and I'm wondering too, I'm just thinking out loud, when we're talking about the healthcare power of attorney, I could certainly see having digital assets in the healthcare document, only because like we talked about, everything's moving to online portals.
Yep.
So if, I have a client that is incapacitated and the agent is logging on to like send a message to the doctor or to be able to request a prescription refill, all of that's going to be on their online medical portal. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to also have digital asset language in the healthcare power of attorney as well, especially if they're different individuals. If we have a
Yeah.
client that's one person for financial and one for healthcare documents.
Yes. So one question
Yeah.
that I did have going on with that is, what would happen if an individual were to have language such as what you just described in their healthcare power of attorney, but didn't have it in their will? Would they still be able to access these accounts?
Until they would die, right? So if
Hmm.
the individual is living and you're advocating for them as the power of attorney or the agent under the healthcare power of attorney and accessing their online portal and making prescription requests, all of that, that's fine while the person is living. But then if you don't have digital asset language in the will, the problem is when that person passes away, then the executor can't take over and have access to those things. Now, again, when we're talking about an online health portal, I don't know how much you would need access to the online health portal, but again, you never know. I just think it's good to have access in the power of attorney and when you pass away under the will. So. Number 3 on here is business and intellectual property. Now, this is interesting because we have at our office like a website, we have a domain. We don't really have online revenue streams, but again, I think that it's important to think through. So many people have websites now because they might be business owners, they might have like side hustles they're doing. So all of that would be considered digital assets. And so you need to make sure that you have documents that has language allowing someone access to that. And I could even see, I haven't run into this yet, but I could see sometimes we do separate financial power of attorneys for businesses. Like if we have somebody that has an entity and they want someone to continue to handle the business, and then they might have a personal financial power of attorney to handle their personal accounts. Again, you want digital asset language in both of those, because if you have a business entity, my guess is that you're going to have some sort of website or domain there or email, that you would want your agent to be able to access. Number 4 on here is subscriptions and licensing accounts. So this is what you were talking about with like streaming services. Like this would be like our Netflix, our Hulus, our Peacocks, all of those streaming services. It would also be things like Kindles, iTunes, those type of assets as well, Connor?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then here at our office, we use a lot of cloud-based systems. So for example, our document storage system, our practice management system are all cloud-based. So they would all fall under subscription and licensing accounts as well. So I'm just thinking through like our Practice Panther, our Box, those type of things that we use internally. Those would all fall under subscription and licensing accounts there. So it's a lot of, all that to say, it's a lot of stuff that falls under digital assets.
Yes.
Okay, so let's now try to understand digital financial assets. So we have these 3 categories: banking and payment accounts, cryptocurrencies and blockchain assets, retirement and tax advantaged accounts. So talk to me a little bit about banking and payment accounts, because we have a lot of clients that do like online transfers. They might have online accounts. They might do some, I have one client who has renters and they all pay through like Venmo, or Zelle, I think is another one too.
Yep. Yep. So all those would be considered digital financial assets. I know for myself, at least, I use Chase, and the main method that I use to get into my account to either move money around or check my account balance would be online through my phone. Um, and I would imagine that a lot of other people, do something similar. It's not always you go into the bank and you ask what your balance is.
Right.
Um, so, and digitally is the best way, and frankly, the easiest way in order for fiduciaries to access that information, figure out how much money you had, where it could go, uh, things like that. I think
Mhm.
it's important that we kind of emphasize that these online accounts, in banking. It may be difficult to access these accounts if you don't have that language in there. And going along with that, PayPal and Venmo PayPal's been around for quite a bit. Venmo is becoming increasingly popular. And those accounts can actually they're all digital. Um, there's no physical Venmo bank that you can go to and deposit money in. Yet you can keep a balance in your Venmo account. So you can have several hundred, several $1,000s in your Venmo account as you can in your Chase or Wells Fargo account. And we need your fiduciaries to get access to that information, get access to those accounts. Um, so in terms of like online brokerage, online investment accounts, I know that there are some online investment entities that are purely online.
Mhm.
They don't have in-person places that you can go to and deposit money and move things around, just speaking across the table to another individual. So it's also important that we emphasize that those are also included. A lot of apps. So I have here Robinhood is an app for your phone that you can move money directly from your Chase Wells Fargo account directly into this app, and you can purchase stocks on the stock market. You can trade stocks directly from your phone. And those accounts, as I said before, aren't really grounded in anything physical. So we need to have the ability to access things like that when the time comes to do so.
My thought when I was reading through this slide was more and more banks don't want to give you a paper statement and they charge you for a paper statement. So even my dad, who's anti computers, anti online bank accounts, I even had him set up his one account online because otherwise he had to pay so much to get a paper statement. And of course, he's like, that's ridiculous. I'm not paying for a paper statement. But the reality is we're only going to see more clients with banking and payment accounts because of the shift that we're trying to make, or the banks are trying to make, to not give paper statements. So how else are you able to monitor your bank accounts or reconcile it unless it's online? That was my thought about that first category. I think that
Mhm.
first category alone means that anybody of any age should have digital asset language, even if they're sitting at home saying, well, I don't do iTunes, I don't have Kindle, I don't stream anything, I have no social media accounts. The fact that so many people access things online because of the cost of having a paper statement is reason enough to have digital asset language in your estate planning documents.
Yep.
All right, let's go to category 2, which is cryptocurrency and blockchain assets. Okay, so Connor, tell me what a blockchain asset is. Because when I saw this, I was like, oh, I don't even know what that is. So tell me what
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah. So even cryptocurrencies are stored on the blockchain. So the blockchain is trying to think of a way to describe it. Um, it's sort of a timeline, if you
Okay.
can think about it like that. So when you hear of somebody mining a Bitcoin,
Yes.
what they're doing is they're having a computer do some tasks, usually mathematical tasks,
Okay.
and what will end up happening is whoever you're doing that task for will issue you a certain amount of Bitcoin,
Okay.
or whatever other coin or currency, online currency you're mining. Um, so once you are given that coin has associated with it sort of an ID number.
Okay.
And that number is stored on what we call the blockchain. And the blockchain is this sort of timeline that kind of tracks where this digital asset is going, where it's been, where it's currently held, who currently holds it. It tells you exactly how it was mined and where it is now. So that's kind of how we track some of these digital assets. And the blockchain isn't something that somebody can just go in and edit to take somebody else's Bitcoin, take somebody else's Ethereum.
Okay.
So it's kind of, if you want to think about it as a timeline or some sort of log, a written log that tells you exactly where all these
Okay.
digital assets have been.
Yeah, that does make sense. I appreciate that. Yeah, that is very helpful. So that would include any private wallets, exchange accounts. You have Coinbase on here as an example. That one I knew. I didn't know the others. But I think that as we see more and more people obtaining or acquiring these assets, the more important it is to have the digital asset language in there. It only makes me feel old when I talk about it because I have to ask what blockchain assets are.
Yes. I do also want to mention too that not all blockchain assets are in the form of cryptocurrency.
Okay.
I do have on here NFTs, and people at home are probably thinking, what is an NFT? So NFTs are rather recent. I call them investments.
Okay.
They are like online artwork.
Okay.
So it's artwork that somebody has created that you can then trade to other individuals for money. So it's interesting how it works. But like Bitcoin and Ethereum, where this piece of art has been and how it was created, who created it, and who currently owns it is all also stored on the blockchain. So these assets could not only be, things like Bitcoin that you can use for purchases, but it's also things like, digital art.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's various forms of IP that also have blockchain associated with it.
Okay. So it's almost like where did this come from? Let's give whose is this? Where did it come from? Like a history almost that's kind of embedded
Yes.
on it. Okay. That makes
Yes.
sense. Okay. Then our last category on the slide is retirement and tax advantaged accounts. So you might have an online managed 401k, IRA, pension account, and you may have digital financial planning tools such as Mint, Personal Capital, all of those. So all that to say, we just need to make sure our estate planning documents have digital asset language in there for all of these reasons, because you can have any of these types of assets. All right, let's, Connor, talk about steps to protect the transfer of digital assets. So I have an iPhone, and in my iPhone, it stores, if I want it to, all of my passwords. So talk
Yes.
to me a little bit about a password manager or encrypted storage for sensitive financial details. What would be the benefit of that?
Yeah. So one really big benefit is it keeps everything in one place.
Mhm.
So in a situation where you would have an individual pass away, and they were to have not only online banking accounts but Venmo accounts, other various digital accounts that you would want to gain access to, that's a place that you can cite to a fiduciary, hey, this is where all of my important information is kept. If you need to access any of this information, here are all the passwords to that information. And it kind of really consolidates, and it might even help to streamline the process once you pass.
Yeah, because any online account I have now requires a password, and I am one of those paranoid people. I like to have a different password for every account. And so then it gets to like, how do I keep track of all of this? Clearly, I don't want to write it down because then all it takes is someone finding my list. So, yes, like I love that my iPhone, if I want it to, stores my passwords on there. And I think you can do that with like any type of password manager. And my My knowledge of this is basically you have one password that then gets you into the password manager that stores all of your passcodes or login information for every account. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. So I would recommend, if we're recommending something to clients in this vein, I would say make sure that whoever you feel is best to handle this after you pass has access to that account via the means of your password and login information.
Yes.
So ensure that you have that written down so that whoever the interested individual is can find that when the time comes.
And more, we actually have clients that will disclose either where they're going to keep their password manager or the information related to, like, maybe login information that they find really important. So we're finding more and more clients do want to disclose that. Now, the next step would be ensuring proper beneficiary designation. So that is one of the simplest ways to not have to go through any of this. Is as soon as someone passes away, if a beneficiary is designated, that beneficiary just fills out the beneficiary forms and submits it to the company, and then would get a check or receive a payout for whatever that asset is by passing probate. So the benefit there is that we wouldn't have to rely on the executor to access those accounts, whether they be online or anywhere else. So it's interesting that the good old fashioned put a beneficiary designation can be really helpful even in the context of digital assets, which I thought was very interesting. The next one is include digital financial assets in estate planning documents. This we, have talked a little bit about making sure that you do. I agree with this bullet point, which is consider a trust if you want to have more control over asset distribution, especially for cryptocurrencies or business revenue streams. So I did have a client that was a very prominent author and would receive a lot of royalties. And so we actually did use a trust because that would allow all of the royalties to come into one place and then be able to disperse those how they wanted. And so a trust can be a nice way to do that. The next one is understand legal and tax implications. So digital assets may be subject to estate, income, or capital gain taxes. So just remember that just because it's not a physical, tangible asset that you can hold doesn't mean it's not going to be subject to tax. So Pennsylvania does have an inheritance tax, and those taxes would apply to anything that would be digital as well as the physical asset. And then, Connor, your point here about cryptocurrencies classified as property by the IRS and requires detailed records of transaction and cost basis. This sounds horrible because basis is just basically saying what equity do I have in this asset? And this is a topic, or this is an area that I hadn't considered, because you're right, cryptocurrency, you can be buying and selling this all the time, and you need a way to be able to track what the basis and those transactions are. That's interesting.
Yep. Yep. I actually rather recently ran into a situation where a friend of mine had bought and sold quite a substantial amount of Bitcoin. And he was actually audited by the IRS because he wasn't keeping track of his buying and selling of this coin. So he had collected all of this money and sold all of the Bitcoin and wasn't reporting it on his taxes.
Yeah.
So even though these assets aren't out in the marketplace as we typically think of cash as being out in the marketplace, we do still really have to look at and evaluate the risks of not reporting stuff like this, and really err on the side of better judgment when it comes to buying and selling these digital assets.
So if I had a stock, which we have clients that have stocks a lot of times, that is not actually housed in an investment account. So you can, for example, have an Edward Jones or a Raymond James account that has stock inside, and anything that you do with that account, obviously you can buy, sell, all of that. We also have clients that have actually purchased individual stock that's not housed in an account, but there's a transfer agent. And a lot of times that might be computer share. So for example, Connor, if I wanted to sell you some stock and it wasn't in like my Edward Jones account, if it's just stock that I actually own the stock shares or the book entries for this particular stock and I sell it to you and I'm transferring it, I'm going to go through a computer share as the transfer agent to transfer that stock to you. And that kind of keeps track of the buying and the selling. When it deals with cryptocurrency, is there any type of transfer agent that's like a third party that would intervene and help keep track of that?
Um, I in terms of agent, I wouldn't. Are you describing agent as like an individual who would be keeping track of this? Is that the?
Well, like computer share has like, for example,
Mhm.
if you had Prudential stock that wasn't in a bank account, but I wanted to sell them to you, or in an estate, I wanted to transfer them to the estate to me as the beneficiary, I would go to Computer Share's website, get their forms because they're the
Mm,
transfer agent. They're the agency that actually handles the transfer of the stocks. And I was curious
yep,
as to whether there was a transfer agent for cryptocurrency.
gotcha. Yeah. So that would that would probably go back to the blockchain. Um, the
Ooh,
blockchain
okay.
would be the thing that would be tracking buying and selling of cryptocurrencies. So in the situation of my friend that I had mentioned, what had happened is you can store cryptocurrencies, and I'm sure that some people have heard of this other story of this individual who stored numerous amounts of Bitcoin, probably 10,000 Bitcoin back in its inception on a hard drive, on a little
Okay.
USB drive, and he ended up throwing it out mistakenly. And now that USB drive is worth something like $300 million. So
What?
yeah, he has actually supposedly purchased the what had been the old landfill in order for him to go through that and find the USB drive. So back to my friend's case, he held this coin on his computer, and then he went to go sell it. And when he went to sell it, whoever bought it gave him the proceeds. And that transaction of him selling it was tracked on the blockchain. And
Okay.
I can't speak for the IRS personally, but I would imagine that the IRS is keeping track of what coins are bought and sold on the blockchain in order to, calculate capital
Right.
gains or any sort of income taxes that you would be incurring in selling such an asset.
That makes sense. Yeah, because you have to be able to find some record or keep some record of what's being sold, purchased. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And then the last point is appoint a financial and digital executor. We talked a little bit about this, just designating somebody to handle digital assets under your financial power of attorney and then under your will to be able to manage and transfer those online financial holdings. All right, let's talk about understanding personal assets. Oh boy. Okay, so here are personal digital assets. So email and communication accounts. So we have Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, text messages, WhatsApp, iMessages. Oh dear. Like there's just so many on here that I'm ticking off and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have all of these.
Yep.
And like I'm always like screenshotting or wanting to keep like a conversation that I had. And yeah, like that's crazy to me when you think about it.
Mhm.
Social media and online profiles. So these are our social media: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, which was formerly Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit accounts. There's personal cloud storage and digital files. So Google Drive, Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive, personal photos, videos, scanned documents, any creative works. Then we have digital media and entertainment. So this would be my Kindle books. It would be my iTunes, any movies that I might have purchased, any gaming accounts and in-game purchases. My one nephew does a lot of online gaming, so that would be anything he's doing through there.
Yep.
And then we have digital memories and online presence. So we have websites, blogs, personal domain names, digital legacy accounts. So there's just a lot of stuff I don't think people realize all falls under digital assets. It's crazy. Okay. So how to protect your digital personal assets. So the first thing is create a personal digital asset inventory. I think this is a great idea. It sounds so simple, but just a list of these accounts, where they located, any sentimental digital files that you have, and then using a password manager or secure document to record access credentials. Very important there. Designating a digital heir or a legacy contact. So this would be sometimes those different companies or custodians are going to have the ability to designate a digital heir, or they might have a legacy contact, and it might not allow them access to all of the information or all of the assets, but it does allow like a succession almost. I think of it like a beneficiary designation, but for digital assets, if we can think of it like that. And then that's where, if there isn't that document with a custodian, that's where we rely on our estate planning documents to give our executor or our agent the ability to access. And that's where the next step is include digital asset language in your estate planning documents. So in your will, trust, all of that stuff, make sure is in there. Understanding platform specific policies. So some services allow post death access. So Google's inactive account manager, but some don't, like Apple iCloud. I didn't know that. Like, that was interesting to me. You want to check the terms of service for the platforms where you store personal data. And then you want to ensure proper access for family members. So share important account information with an attorney or with your executor. Use external storage. So that's where you were talking, Connor, about the flash drive, the USB drive, unless you lose it.
Yep.
But that's a great place to keep it. Hard drives or backup copies of any digital content that you want to make sure to keep a hold of. Understanding business and intellectual property. So we have business and e-commerce accounts. So a lot of these are just, you may have personal or a business, because I was thinking like an Amazon account, but you can also have an Amazon seller account if you're selling things on Amazon, PayPal, all of those. Website and domain ownership. So again, here at our office, we have a domain, so we would need to make sure that we have somebody that can access that. Monetize digital content and revenue streams, which might be related to some of those things like YouTube or your website. Intellectual property rights, such as books, blogs, music, photography, digital art, trademarks and patents for brands and inventions, and then business, social media, and online presence. So for example, on Facebook, I have a personal account, but then I also have a business account as well. So again, same thing, you want to make sure that you're giving somebody access to an online account, but also to your business page as well. Any comments about this slide at all, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is in terms of business versus personal assets. The one thing that I would tell clients to keep in mind is that just because we're allowing access to your personal online assets doesn't automatically mean that when you pass, those same people are going to be able to get access to your business accounts or vice versa. So if we're doing separate planning for businesses, we would want to have that language spanning across both documents, just so we cover all our bases.
Absolutely. I agree with that for sure. Yeah. How to protect business and IP digital assets. So create an inventory. So I feel like all of these, it starts with creating that inventory, like having a
Yep.
list of those accounts, subscriptions, assets, and then having, again, like a password manager that allows access. That seems to be the number one thing, which makes sense. It's very basic, but it's logical, and we need that. Second step would be ensuring a proper business succession plan. This is where we had talked about before. Sometimes we have clients that do a separate business financial power of attorney. And if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you still have digital asset language in there as well. And including it in operating agreements or governing documents, maybe bylaws, that's going to be really important as well. Including business and IP digital asset language in those legal documents, and then understanding the transferability and licensing issues. So again, you always want to check your terms of service, check the agreement, see what is in there as far as who can access that. Anything else about this slide, Connor?
No.
Okay. Oh boy, let's talk about subscriptions and licensing
Yeah.
agreements. All right, tell me a little bit about the difference between these.
Yeah. So when we're talking about it really comes down to a difference between digitally owned assets and digitally licensed assets. Um, so your digitally owned assets. So to give you an example, um, if you were to go to a store, get a Kindle, and you were to download books onto that Kindle, that would be a digitally owned asset.
Okay.
Whereas if you were to buy some sort of payment plan or subscription in order to read a certain amount of books a month, and that
Gotcha.
book were to fall on there, that would be a digitally licensed asset. So digitally licensed assets are not transferable. So many of these companies, like Amazon, who I believe runs Kindle, has in their terms of service that upon death, you cannot transfer the licensure to a fiduciary. You can't will it to anybody. So if you had not purchased the book or the movie or whatever it is, and you had just merely licensed it, that right to access that information goes away upon death. Whereas if you had downloaded that book somewhere, you had downloaded that movie somewhere, whether it be onto your computer or your hard drive or something like that, and you're not just paying a little subscription for it, you're not just paying a licensure for it, then those are transferable. We can transfer those. So it's important to keep in mind when you're looking at these different assets. And when you're going and making different accounts, like a Disney Plus account or a Netflix account, whether or not you're actually purchasing the information that you're seeking to get a hold of, or whether or not you're just licensing the ability to use that information for the time that you're alive.
That is a little tricky because I have to think through, like, for example, I downloaded a movie on Amazon, but it's not stored anywhere other than my Amazon account.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't
Yes.
download it somewhere else outside of the
Yes.
platform. So that would be a license to be able to access that movie that I downloaded.
Mhm.
Okay. On the flip side of that, I do a lot of reading, so I do purchase books and download them on my Kindle. So that would be something that I actually own because it was transferred to my Kindle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I had toyed, this is actually helpful because I had toyed, Kindle has something where you can do a subscription where you can have access to so many books a month. That would be the difference. I wouldn't own those books. I just have the ability to access those books. It's interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
That's helpful. You really have to think about that. My goodness. All right, terms of service agreements. So this would be when you create an account with an online service, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, you agree to their terms of service, which is a legally binding contract that outlines what you can and cannot do with your account. And these agreements are often going to restrict access to only the original user, meaning that if someone dies, the family might not automatically be able to have access to manage the account. So that's where some custodians do have a separate agreement that says, these are the terms of services, but then we also have like a legacy contact or something like that where that agreement governs if someone passes away. We're seeing more and more companies do that, but again, the default is if you don't have that agreement, if you have it in your estate planning documents, then it would give access up to what that company goes back to the couple of things like deleted contents and joint accounts, obviously you wouldn't be able to access. But you really have to pay attention. And I do this so often where I just scroll and click I accept and I'm not actually reading the terms of service agreements because I just want whatever service or whatever online account that is. But I think, again, it goes back to you really need to read the terms of service to see if there are any restrictions on who can access that if you would pass away.
Yes. Yes, and on top of that, I would also emphasize that in terms of service agreements, it would also contain whether or not you were, going back a couple slides, actually purchasing the asset or just purchasing a license to view the asset. So it's important. I know, I don't do it. I don't usually read the terms of service, but it's important to definitely read the terms of service, especially if you want to figure out whether or not you actually own that asset as well.
Right, right. All right, let's talk about how terms of service might affect your estate plan. So, number one thing is no automatic transfer of ownership. Many platforms prohibit transferring accounts to another person. Even if a will states that a beneficiary should receive the account, the company's policy may override it. So, you want to make sure you're reading those terms of service. No legal access for family members without specific planning. They may not be able to access things like digital files, emails, or any online financial accounts. Some platforms may lock or delete accounts upon notification of death. And then company-specific rules. So we have Google here that offers an inactive account manager feature that allows users to designate a trusted contact to access data over or after inactivity for a set period. I like that idea. I think that's a great idea. Apple, accounts and purchases cannot be transferred under their terms of service. Facebook allows users to assign a legacy contact to maintain their memorialized account, but does not provide full access to the contact. And then PayPal and online banking accounts are closed upon death, requiring a legal process to transfer those remaining funds. That's where you'd have to get like the short certificate, submit all of that, and then they would transfer any of those remaining funds. Anything about this slide, Connor, that you wanted to mention?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. All right, let's talk about estate planning solutions to address terms of service provision. So number one, utilize legacy and access features. So again, some platforms allow you to name that trusted person who can access certain information after death. You just have to know which of those platforms allow that. So Google, Facebook, they're two good examples. Number two, include digital asset provisions in the estate planning documents. So wills, trusts, powers of attorneys, we want to make sure they explicitly grant fiduciaries permission to access digital accounts and reference things like RFADA, which is the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets. And then securely store login information. So this goes back to, we talked about a password manager or secure document. And then some services offer encrypted storage specifically for estate planning purposes. Yeah, it gets more complicated than you think when you start actually working through everything. Okay, so let's do a little bit of review. Recommendations for estate planning in the digital age. All right, Connor, walk me through this. What do we need to make sure to do? What are our recommendations?
Yeah. So what we would recommend really is including clear language for wills, trusts, powers of attorney. We want to make sure that we're granting the fiduciary access to these digital assets. We also want to utilize, as previously mentioned, those online legacy tools, such as Google. They would allow users to designate trusted individuals for account access, and that access may be limited depending upon the whoever holds that information. So we also want to create an inventory of all of our digital assets, or as many as we can. It's okay if you don't get all of them, but write down as many of the digital assets as you can, whether that be Venmo or PayPal accounts, or other sorts of things like Facebook, other social media accounts, and going back to kind of that consolidation of all those passwords. There are a lot of systems now in place. Apple has it. Even on my desktop, I have it. It stores all the passwords in one space. So we want to make sure that we can give fiduciaries access to that information if it is consolidated in such a manner. So
We always do an intake form that we send to clients when they call to schedule an initial consultation, and it asks them to list like assets, account numbers, how it's owned. It wouldn't be a bad idea, I think, to start creating a list of digital assets that people have. Like, hey, make a list of different subscriptions that you might have, different digital assets, because at least then you have a place to start. Your executor would have a place to start when it's talking about those online accounts too. And so many of them come automatically out of people's bank accounts now. So that's the other thing, is that you have to make sure that, is there anything that's automatically being withdrawn from your account that somebody would need to know if you passed away, because you'd want to cancel that subscription. Okay, use trust for digital asset management. Well, I'm always a fan of trust, so I'm always going to want to do trust. So, but they can hold ownership of digital assets, allowing a trustee to manage them without violating terms of service. Useful for cryptocurrency, intellectual property, and revenue generating digital assets. Obtain express consent for highly private information. Ensure the estate plan explicitly grants fiduciaries access to sensitive digital communications like emails, financial accounts, medical records. And regularly update your digital estate plan. So that means that if you have a list for digital accounts, you want to make sure you're keeping that updated. And then, like I said, our digital asset stuff in Pennsylvania passed in 2020. I don't think we've seen the last of law updates related to digital assets. You want to make sure your fiduciaries remain informed about their responsibilities and any new security measures in place. Connor, that was a lot of information. So
Yes.
what we're going to tell clients is that you can always call our office to schedule an initial consultation. Our contact number is 717-655-2676. We're located in Waynesboro, so you're always welcome to stop by and say hello. Is there anything else, Connor, that you can think of as it relates to digital assets that we want our clients to know?
Not anything that we haven't already mentioned. The biggest thing that I think I would stress is keeping loved ones in the loop. Really make sure that not only they have a handle on what kind of assets you have, but also in that same vein that you also have a handle on what kind of digital assets you may have, and whether that comes to asking us for advice, or just asking, your grandson, granddaughter, daughter, to take a look at maybe terms of service, take a look at your passwords, make sure all those things are in order, make sure that they understand where everything is a great way to move forward.
I think that's great. I appreciate your help with this, Connor, because as we've
Yeah.
established, I don't understand all the terminology. I'm not that up on things like blockchains, so I appreciate you giving us some background there. So, Connor Burns, thank you for being here. This is Samantha with the Law Offices of Samantha Wolfe. Thank you guys for joining us for this month's virtual seminar. Take care, everybody.